I had to ask you a question. Who do you think wrote that?
The Ojibwe
Oh,
saying.
gee, we say like who put that on his wall? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Serialized. I'm your host, Kino. Joined again, as always, talking about season 6A of The Sopranos. So we're actually going to divide season 6 into two seasons. Like it sort of already is. I think if you actually look at the way it's organized, I think it's called just season 6. I think it's like a way to not have to pay the actors more money each season, but to me it really does feel like two distinct seasons. What do you think about that distinction, Stephanie?
Oh, definitely. I mean, when I think of 6A, I think, of course, we start out with the Seven Souls montage, and then I think of sort of, us jumping forward to, the gunshot wound, but also, a couple of other, of course, losses that we'll talk about, Eugene, Ray Curto, and then I think of some other sort of key moments like Vito that we'll talk about. And then when I think of 6B, I think more of like sort of the final impending doom where it's like sort of like when Junior when he thinks about like the game we used to play as kids, crack the whip, when it's like one happens and then the next thing you know, everyone else. That's sort of like what I think of when I think of 6B.
Yeah, it's definitely like the calm before the storm, or the fall, as it is in the last half. We will talk about 6B next episode, but that's a very, very dark few episodes there. But yeah, season 6A starts off on a relatively happy note. I mean, everyone's alive and doing well at the start of it. We have members only, so one of the first episodes to kind of have Eugene Pontecorvo as a major focus of the episode. He actually got made at the same time as Christopher, so they're sort of colleagues in that regard, but he's very much been like a background player throughout the whole show. But he gets a storyline in this episode where he gets to be front and center, which is him wanting to move to Florida, stop being a mobster, but he can't escape Tony. And we learn later that he also can't escape the FBI, who he is an informant for. So he's really caught between a rock and a hard place this episode.
Yeah, when I love the when Deanne says his master's voice, and I think like no, his master's voice is more like because she doesn't even know the part about the FBI. She thinks it's just Tony.
It's interesting that she suggests that he kill Tony, and he's like, "Oh, I can't do that." But I noticed when I was rewatching this episode that when he gets told he can't move to Florida by Silvio, he's kind of steaming, in the room after everyone's gone, and Vito comes in and says like, it's not such a crazy idea that I might be boss one day. And I only just thought about this, but I wonder if Vito was almost suggesting to him too, like, hey, if something were to happen to Tony, I would be the boss and I might, allow you to go. He was almost like hinting that he wanted him to kill him too, because we see Vito's ambition this season, these first, few episodes, especially, that now that he's the biggest earner after Ralph is gone, he kind of sees himself becoming the boss.
Oh yeah, I think Vito got a huge sort of confidence boost. I think from his weight loss. Also, I think that's sort of because it was kind of bold of him to even suggest that to Eugene. Whether it was to sort of hint in that I'd be okay with you leaving, or even just to for him being proud of himself. But it's almost like I mean he does that on multiple occasions actually in 6A. He does that with Larry Breesy. I think Vito started to sort of feel invincible, but yeah, it definitely was a notable comment to Eugene at that moment.
Which is very funny knowing where the character ends up going, that he thinks he's so invincible like this. But yeah, I think we're seeing Vito's ambition here. And I think whether or not that was like a conscious thing that they were doing, I think it's laying the foundation for we're going to tie into the final episode here. Eugene and the members only jacket is a big part of that. And of course, we'll go into a lot of details when we get to the next episode here. But this episode sets up a lot of dominoes, which are going to be or a lot of themes that are going to be playing throughout the season and will very much pay off in the final episode here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of motive for thinking about later when suspects, if we think that that Tony was shot, certainly Deanne Pontecorvo, she already hated Tony enough. So and then if she after he dies, I could think she'd only hate him more.
So we got, I mean, this episode's a really great one. We got a lot of plot lines going up here, but obviously it climaxes in Tony being shot at the end here in a very, very brutal way, you know, kind of taking a lot of the cinematic nature out of being shot. It's bloody, it's painful. He's struggling to get up and stuff like that. And it ends here with you almost being like, oh my God, is he dead? Because they don't show him getting help. They show him just kind of like eyes open, staring off into death here, and you're almost wondering like what the hell happened.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I was thinking, because I was rewatching it recently, and I was thinking like, imagine watching that live, like for the first time while it aired, which I didn't get to do, but I can just imagine like people were thinking, holy shit, like is Tony dead?
That sounds a little, you know, funny to some people because it's like, oh, how can he die? You know, it's the first episode, but you know, this was such a groundbreaking show that you know you could believe that, hey, yeah, maybe he will die. You know, in the last season here, and there will be other shows that HBO will do something like that. But and especially, you know, leading into the next episode here, Join the Club, which opens with a dream sequence here where you're like, wait, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is a completely different Tony Soprano than we're used to. He's acting different. He doesn't have the accent. The story's different. And then, of course, you know, we learned that it's a coma that he's in. But yeah, obviously I didn't see it live either. But I just had to imagine that like the build up to these episodes is just like, if you're watching it live, you're like, what the hell is happening here?
Yeah, and especially there was, you know, with a big break between seasons 5 and 6, you know, people were already waiting forever, and then I could, you know, it's hard to imagine, but I love the symbolism in this episode when we think about Tony's briefcase. It sort of reminds me of Meadow's suitcase, just in the sense of like symbol of someone's life and like all of their stuff, whatever that stuff is, like good or bad. So it just kind of made me think about identity as a whole.
You brought up the Meadow suitcase thing. I just had to throw out a quick thing. I know this is technically last season. I think Finn was absolutely trying to break up with Meadow when he brought out that suitcase. Like, because we saw him, you know, kind of flirting with that
Alicia,
Felicia.
he took her idea. He took her idea when she was like, if you're not married, you can just pack up and leave when shit hits the fan. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm
No,
like,
no, no. It's completely. I get it. That's. I know it's a side tangent here. We're trying to have a serious discussion about Join the Club, but when he's like, there was no overt intentionality. I'm like, I think there was. I think you were kind of looking for the exit here, and which is funny that they ended up getting engaged. But it just when you brought up the briefcase, I was like, oh yeah, that reminded me of that.
yeah, there's so much like, so much to like dive into and analyze with that whole Meadow and scenario.
But obviously, you know, the coma dream here, where we're seeing my interpretation of it is we're seeing what Tony's life could have been if he didn't join the mob. It's still him, you know. He's not Kevin Finnerty as the you know the ID that he finds. That's a separate person than his identity in the dream. He's still Tony Soprano, but in this one, he's a salesman. Which there are multiple callouts in the series that if Tony hadn't gone into the mafia, he constantly says like, "Oh, I would have, you know, sold patio
Yeah,
furniture."
like when he tells Meadow like we can be patio salesmen, or even to Carmela, well, we can start a rattlesnake ranch, and then yeah, with the patio selling patio furniture, yeah, it's Tony's alternate if he would have not been in the mob.
And even in the Many Saints, they reference this again, where Olivia suggested he go work for her cousin or something's like furniture store. So, and in this dream, he says that before he started selling military grade equipment, whatever he's selling in this episode, he was a patio furniture salesman. So they're obviously playing into this idea that this is the life he could have had if he did not go into the mob. And there's a lot of similarities between this Tony Soprano and the Mafia one. You know, they both cheat on their wives. They're kind of the same guy, but this one is just obviously a lot less like, you know, he's scared to break the law. He's a normal citizen. He's like a regular kind of guy rather than the one that the mob kind of formed him into. So it's a very interesting look at. I like shows that kind of do this, like, oh, what could have been for some of these characters.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love shows that do that, and shows that also, yeah, like sort of show someone's origin story, and then also this sort of alternative state. I think it was interesting how like you said, was just a regular guy, but he was still, yeah, still competitive, still had an ego. It was just, for him, it was how many, we won the brass salesman, 12 months in a row, as opposed to getting the most money from the most businesses.
Interesting detail. This episode, the dream takes place in Costa Mesa, California, which is sort of outside of LA. It's in Orange County. And Michael Imperioli and Steve Sciarippa, when they were doing their in conversation with Sopranos thing that, they were going around, they're mostly on the East Coast because I think they both live out there, but they had one that was scheduled and they were going to do it in Costa Mesa. And I was really looking forward to that. I bought my ticket and everything. And then stupid Michael Imperioli got a Broadway play, so he had to cancel that tour. So I'm always pissed off that I didn't get to see their live event.
Well, that sucks. But yeah, I know what you mean, because most of them I noticed were very like limited to the East Coast. I think, like you said, because they live out there. But
yeah, maybe one day they'll come back out here again, but it's okay. But yeah, obviously, in this stream we also have everyone kind of dealing in the real world of dealing with Tony's being in the hospital. Carmela's kind of struggling to how to handle her husband might be dying. Very touching. It's this episode where Christopher holds her, right?
Yes, when she's crying. That is such a beautiful moment.
One of the very few, by the way, we get to see between Carmela and Christopher, even though they're the ones who are actually cousins, not her and Tony.
Yeah, I loved seeing when Christopher was holding even Meadows' hand there at that one moment when she was sleeping, when they were like around the same time, or it was a similar time. Yeah, it was like a sort of a rare, like, close moment between them.
Yeah, it's actually funny when you think about how few interactions Christopher had with his extended. It was always with Tony. It was never with really Carmela, or he had that one episode in season 1 with Meadow. But yeah, it's nice to see these actors act with each other in ways they don't usually get to. But we also have the introduction of kind of the terrorist angle. Agent Harris last episode announced that he had joined the counterterrorism division, so he's no longer hunting the mafia guys, so to speak. And this kind of terror post 9/11 plot line is going to continue to run throughout the whole season.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, all the way literally up through their last conversation when he tells them about the 2 Arabs that he knows about at the merchant bank.
And as this dream ends, Tony has this kind of Alzheimer's disease. He doesn't know who he is. Again, this whole dream is him kind of struggling with the idea of like, who am I? Where am I going? And it's interesting that they bring up the Buddhist angle again with these monks who he gets into a fist fight with. And even though Michael Imperioli said that there wasn't any intentionality behind that, I can't help but think that, like, yeah, there's something with Buddhism in this storyline where it's like, they're almost like combative with the idea of Buddhism.
Yeah, Michael would say there's no abundant intentionality.
Exactly.
I think it was touching also that, I think if I remember correctly, David Chase, that these dream sequences in 6A was sort of a tribute or a way of his processing his grief over the death of John Patterson, one of the directors.
That makes sense. And I think, these dream sequences in general are very, they're very thematic. They're dealing with a lot of emotion. I could easily see Chase, just like how the whole series was kind of David Chase working through his mommy issues. And I could see that with these dream sequences. They deal with death and spirituality, and not just this dream, but a lot of the dreams are like that. So I could totally see that. But moving into episode 3 here, Mayhem, still dealing with the Coma dream, but kind of continuing the storyline back in the real world too of, we got a storyline with Paulie and Vito here, not wanting to hand over the money they stole basically to Carmela, because again, if Tony dies, they ain't kicking up nothing to Carmela. Like they're only looking out for themselves.
Yeah, and this is where we see like Phil sort of his old school sort of mentality when he tells Vito, it's tempting, but you can't think that way. Vito still kept thinking that way anyway, but
again, it was very funny seeing him even like talking with Finn when he shows up again, kind of threatening him, like touching his like or his wrist or hand or something. Again, very bold move, but I think he was trying to be like a power play, basically, to be like, hey, don't you even think about saying anything.
And I'm like, if you were to do power play like that, like probably not the best power play to harass him again.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe he did want. Maybe he wanted Finn. Who knows? But yeah, we got that storyline going on here. We have AJ basically continuing to disappoint his parents, and then Carmela finally blowing up at him. Like all these years of like trying to rationalize, his problems and stuff like that. And finally, she just blows up and says kind of what she's been thinking for a long time at him. But it's a very emotional sequence there.
Yeah, I don't blame her. I mean, I know that of course he's processing a lot of things. He's going through a lot, but excuse me. But I think that he's even like, oh, he had a stomach virus and that's why he couldn't come to the hospital. Like, meanwhile, pretty sure it was just he like didn't want to come.
I like what Rosalie says when Carmela's trying to be like, well, he can't deal with seeing his father, blah blah. And he has all this like psychological responses, and Rosalie is like, oh, isn't that fucking nice or whatever? But he needs to fucking just step up and be here for his family like everyone else is.
Yeah, and then how she then criticized like, oh, how would you like? And then Rosalie's like, yeah, I know for my own son who's died. Like that's why I'm telling you because I know from experience.
It was honestly kind of mean that Carmela said that about her son, which I get that she's going through her own emotional stuff here, but like
It wasn't nice.
yeah, I mean that's her son who died, like Jesus Christ, but
Maybe that's why she brings it up again in Cold Stones. That like is another thing. I just thought of that.
yeah,
Actually.
we'll talk about Cold
Yeah,
Stones
we'll
here
talk
because
about
that's
it once we get down there.
yeah, that's a great Carmel episode. But we have Christopher trying to set up his mob movie again. I think that the whole storyline with JT and the script and all this kind of stuff is sort of like a meta joke on the film industry. Like it was Chase kind of making fun of these like shitty low budget movies that people kind of make here, and yeah, I think it's very much like a meta storyline.
Yeah, and it was definitely a lot of like just comic relief, even with with the whole when they were discussing it, and then Sylvia's is Jason and Freddy, different kind of movie, and then we Carmine talking about 9 series under the South Beach Drum. It was it was some nice like comic relief, sort of as an alternate to the hospital goings on.
And we have Silvio in this episode stepping up as the leader of the family, as consigliere, kind of second in command. He's stepping up now that Tony's in the coma. There's an interesting line he has it in here where he's talking to his wife, and he was saying that when Jackie died, he was considered for the role of boss. And I always thought that line was a meta reference to the fact that Steven Van Zandt, Silvio's actor, was actually considered for the role of Tony Soprano before the series got picked up. David Chase just liked his look. And I always thought that was like kind of a reference to the fact that he was almost Tony Soprano in the series.
Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that, and also the fact of his natural sort of role as consigliere to Bruce. I think that's probably something that he's gotten, or a question that he's gotten asked before in that role too. I think it's just I imagine there's a lot of overlap.
And of course, he'll get his own show later on,
Lilyhammer. I love that. It's his coma dream. It's his one long coma
It's his
dream.
coma dream, exactly. So we've come full circle here. But, speaking of Tony's coma dream here, we continue that storyline. He's being sued by those monks. He goes to talk with them. He's trying to find his identity. And at the end here, he goes to this house where he sees his cousin, Tony Blundetto, who he doesn't recognize, and he's being invited into the house. There's kind of a shadowy woman's figure there that scares him, and he hears Meadows' voice, which ends up him and not entering the house and coming back to life. And I think it's very clear that house represented death, specifically hell, I think, and he was almost on his way to there, but Meadows' voice kind of brought him back.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like the colors and the themes in that sense, we talk about how like black is death, white too. Like when they talked about the poem from a while back from like season 3. I know I'm going backwards a little bit, but I think it's sort of this idea that both black and white can be symbolic of death. But instead of dying and walking in the house, that big white light was him opening his eyes.
One of the better dream sequences in my mind is Coma Dream. I think it's very symbolic. I think it works really well. It's not too strange. Like some people don't like to test dream because of how strange it is, but this one very straightforward, has very solid thematic roots to it, and it's a really good storyline for these 2 episodes here, which kind of really are a two-parter here, but they lead really well into what Tony goes through in this season. And moving on to the next episode here, Fleshy Part of the Thigh, we continue on with Tony in the hospital and all the stuff that he's dealing with here. I had to ask you a question. Who do you think wrote that?
The
we say, like who put that on his wall?
Like the most obvious answer would be Janice, but I sort of just resigned myself to the fact that I was never gonna actually have an answer. I know some people have said, speculated as Aaron Arkaway, even Bob Brewster, or Janice. I think that also could just be as simple as it might have been just there, or like it might have just been like even from the previous room, or someone might have just. I'll throw it back to you. Who do you think it was from?
I'm gonna say I think it was God who put that thing there as a message to Tony. I don't think it was any of the characters. It might not be God, it might be like fate or something, but I think it might be like no one, and it was just there, like you said. But I don't think any of the characters put it there. I think it was just like kind of a message for Tony to deal with, and he does in this episode sort of take that message into heart, the same way he has the conversation with the scientist guy.
Oh, John Schwinn.
John Schwinn, yes. And he's really thinking about his place in the universe after he had this near-death experience here. And that's gonna be a thing for a few episodes before he eventually kind of drops it and resumes his normal posture. But yeah, I don't think it was anyone. I think it was just kind of fate that was guiding him here, or trying to make him reflect on his place in the universe.
That's definitely a possibility, and I think it goes really well with everything that John Schwinn was discussing. I love, he's one of my favorite one episode characters, and I just love how his whole monologue about the separate entities, the separate, or with molecules, tornadoes are just wind stirred up in different directions. I love that because I think I felt that it did such a good job of sort of just conveying this overall theme of who are we, who am I, where am I going, like what are we in this big universe.
And it shows Tony's curiosity. So Tony was always this guy who really liked to talk with different people. I'm thinking of like the Reverend from the second season, where he liked talking with people outside the mafia. He liked talking with interesting, like philosophical people who made him think. He was always very curious about life and death and stuff like that. I think he naturally gravitated towards some of these people who, like Melfi even, who really kind of made him think about a larger world than just the mob world that he's a part of.
Definitely. And I think with someone like John Schwinn also, he wasn't threatened by him. Like he knew that this was this old, like innocent man. So he was able to actually sort of talk to him like one-to-one without having to have his guard up, thinking like, oh, what's this guy's agenda?
And we have, a Paulie storyline this episode with him learning that his mother is not his real mother. It was his aunt. And again, sort of a funny storyline in some regards because of how ridiculous he acts. Also a very sad one, considering how like petulant he is, which, it's funny how much shit people give AJ for being a spoiled kind of child like this. But here we have Paulie, fucking 60 plus years old, acting way worse than AJ ever did in regards to his own mother, or adopted mother here. But yeah, it shows the capability of the actor here, who, this character Paulie kind of started off as just comic relief and just kind of like the serious guy on the show, and here they have a real like emotional storyline that Tony Sirico does a great job of actually acting out.
Definitely. I mean, he did such a great job when they showed him crying when Jason Brown's mother was talking about him. It was just very, very powerful. I also thought he acted completely out of line, and some comic relief too, of course, like when he takes the TV and throws it out the window, like stuff that's just so absurd that it's funny. But yeah, it definitely brought in a whole new layer of sort of, because we don't know much about Paulie's personal life, so it's like a whole new layer to sort of analyze.
There's an interesting thing here with this kid, Jason, who is Dick Barone's son. The show has this thing about kids named Jason who are really dumb. We have the two Jasons who are Patsy Parisi and Carlo Gervasi's sons who get in trouble later on. We're actually gonna meet them later on this season. And we have Jason and Justin, who are Tony Blundetto's sons. There's Jason, the boy toy of the Lady Shylock. So the show has this thing about, I don't know, someone David Chase must have known like a really dumb Jason or something when he's growing up, because every character he names Jason on the show is pretty much stupid, including also the Jason who screws up the tombstone for Joey Peeps.
Oh yes, he's dyslexic. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right. And then there's a few Justins, but yeah, definitely the most Jasons.
Yeah, something with that name obviously means something to David Chase.
And he probably would deny it if someone asked him.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't even remember.
He'd be like, "What is it talking about?"
Again, I don't know if it means anything specific, but it's just an interesting call out.
It meant something to someone for them to keep using it.
But, moving on to the next episode here, Mr. and Mrs. John Sacramone request, the 5th episode of the season, dealing with the wedding of, John's daughter, not the one played by
the Penguin woman.
Yes. Kristen Milotti. Sorry. Yeah, Kristen Milotti, way before she was famous. Again, there's a lot of people on this show way before they were famous. We talked about Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
But obviously she'll have her own mob show later on.
Meadows' roommate, one of her roommates, from back in season 4, the one with the curly hair, who ended up being Jimmy Darmody's girlfriend in Boardwalk Empire.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And obviously, and one of AJ's friends obviously goes on.
Yeah. Lucky Luciano.
Lucky Luciano is really good in that show. So we have Tony out of the hospital in this episode. He's back at home, kind of, but he's still obviously very weak from being shot. He's vulnerable, and his people recognize that. They're starting to kind of talk back to him. They're not respecting him as much because he's in a vulnerable position, and he gets the kind of idea from Melfi inadvertently to assert his dominance again over his bodyguard Perry, who he's kind of like an idiot too, like a hot-headed muscle guy, but Tony beats him up before immediately like vomiting because he can't, the physical stress. But we have Tony kind of like animalistically asserting his dominance over the group again.
Yeah, and I think Carmela almost sort of made him feel weak, because when she said to him, like, the first, I think, day he went back to work, she's like, "I feel like a mommy." Like, she says that, and I'm just like, oh, he probably did not like hearing that, especially in front of the guy picking him up. But yeah, he's definitely feeling insecure, even looking at, Bobby Bacala.
Well, it's interesting. At first, he wants to kind of talk about his experience with the guys. And we're going to see the same thing in part 2, season 6B, where he's trying to kind of share some of the revelations he went through. In this case, it's like the physical stuff, but he gets kind of cut off. They don't, they don't want to understand him like that. And again, I think Tony was always kind of looking for real relationships and real friends who he could, talk to about this stuff. But, the mob world is not for that. They don't want honesty. They don't want to be, empathetic, and he has to show strength instead. So it's a sad kind of place he finds himself in this world.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a good feeling, and I think he knows that too, especially after vomiting and throwing up.
And we have Vito being discovered at a gay bar in this episode. Again, not really a good idea for him to be going to some of these places here. It's kind of reckless to assume he got caught once before and he managed to get out of it, but I mean, this one here with the whole outfit, like this is going to be a problem in a few episodes here.
Yeah, I think he almost said like fuck it once when Tony was alive and came out of his coma, because to me I'm like it was just such a reckless thing to do. Like, did he realize he wasn't going to be boss yet? So he's like, oh, screw it, I'm going out.
There's something with like, he goes to the wedding and stuff and sees all these people kind of in love, and he can't really be himself in this episode. Like, I mean, I'm sure he, cares for his wife and children, but obviously he can't be, who he is in his heart. So yeah, he goes out to kind of experience that, but that's going to be a problem in this next episode here, which is Live Free or Die. The episode shares the title with Breaking Bad, even though the only direct connection is they both end in
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, yes, that's the state motto. But yeah, so he got spotted at the gay club, and then all the news kind of comes out. Meadow leaks it that Finn saw Vito the construction site, and they bring him in, which is one of the funniest scenes to see this kid kind of being interrogated by mobsters. But yeah, they're in this position where they're not quite sure how to deal with this. Like, obviously, in the traditional mob, homosexuality is punished by death. But Tony, on the other hand, is sort of kind of a more progressive guy in the sense that he doesn't really care that much. Like, he just wants Vito's money. He doesn't really care what people do. He's not as hardcore as someone like Phil. But again, he's kind of stuck in this world where these traditions, matter.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's the idea, like the perception that they should care. Almost like it kind of reminds me even with Junior, like back in season 1 when he's like, I don't make the rules in terms of why he can't like talk about going down on women. Just like the idea that like it's not okay to think that's okay, even if they do think that's okay.
Well, they think it's funny too. Even when they're all mad, like, I want to kill him, they immediately afterwards just start laughing because it's so ridiculous. Like it's not something that makes them really that mad. They're almost think of it more as like a joke, like that he's doing this stuff. But yeah, again, they feel the need to have this kind of performative rage against it, and they also have to deal with Phil, who has some kind of actual rage, against Vito for doing this. So yeah, it's a hard. It's a tough position for Tony to be in because, again, Vito's his biggest earner. At the end of the day, what Tony really cares about is just how much money he's going to make. And yeah, he's struggling with how to deal with the situation.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, Vito, he probably would have ended up, staying alive, but he couldn't seem the life was too much of a temptation for him.
And we'll see this storyline play out in more episodes here. Meanwhile, Tony also kills Rusty in this episode on as a favor to Johnny Sack. We have some stuff with Carmela trying to continue to get her house built. Yeah, and Tony again dragging his feet because again he doesn't give a shit, right? He's just like, I don't like that my wife is out of the house doing all this stuff. I want her to be focused on making my dinner and stuff. So yeah, he doesn't really support her building project.
Right. Not until she starts talking about Adriana anyway. And then he wants her to be busy with something.
Then it's a problem, and we're gonna see that in a couple episodes here. But moving into the next episode, Luxury Lounge here, we have Christopher, dealing with Hollywood, going out there for a meeting again, kind of poking fun at the whole Hollywood, celebrity shtick that they've been doing all the way back from like the first and second seasons. But yeah, having Christopher basically having like a complete meltdown out here again with all this temptation of Hollywood.
Definitely. And I think it was sort of like an episode with some comic relief, sort of, which is, I think, nice because season 6 especially, I mean, season 6A and season 6B more so, but, sort of the dual storylines with Christopher and Carmine and then Arty and Benny. It was good. I found a lot of comic relief in it.
I mean, the fact that he's like punched Lauren Bacall in the face and stole her gift bag. Yeah, it's really, really funny. But we also have a really good storyline here with Arty. Again, it's been a little while since we've had an Arty-focused episode here, but him kind of struggling with his restaurant, struggling with, again, kind of lusting after a new woman, wanting to be, a guy like Tony or even Benny, who's with this girl. But at the end of the episode here, cooking that dinner for them and kind of rediscovering his passion for cooking, which is really what he should have been. Like, that's the important part, his cooking, his passion, his art. He shouldn't be kind of chasing the life of a gangster or anything. He should be kind of embracing, his role as a chef, which is a great role. It's something that I think Tony was sort of jealous of Arty for, that he had this passion and this career and stuff like that. And he didn't have to worry about all the stresses of being a mobster.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that Arty, like you said, cooking was his passion. I don't think he had this real desire to actually be, a Tony Soprano. I think that cooking was his real passion. It's just, some other shit gets in the way, that causes agita. But here it was like, yeah, he was really able to get back to the basics.
Yeah, it's a nice little ending for Arty, and it's actually we don't see him a lot moving forward from this episode. Like, yeah, he's in the background of some stuff. They have a conversation, but this was sort of the ending of his character here. He rediscovers, his love of cooking and he cooks from his father or grandfather's recipe here and his roots to Italy and stuff like that. So it's a really nice ending for the character.
Yeah, that's a good point because yeah, I mean the next like when we see them obviously at the end, I think of like the Blue Comet where he and Charmaine are coming up to us. But yeah, that's sort of just like they're cool, and then yeah, and then he tells them, "Oh, the Jets coach is here." So it's, yeah, like Artie and Charmaine, they were like pretty stable there at the end.
Yeah, it was a nice. They're pretty lucky because it ends worse for a lot of these characters. And the next episode here, Johnny Cakes, again continuing the Vito storyline here with him being in New Hampshire, falling for this guy who runs a diner, finally kind of opening up and admitting he's gay. I know a lot of people don't love this Vito storyline here because it kind of goes on for a while, and I do admit that it's actually quite a few episodes here dealing with Vito specifically, but I thought it pays off pretty well, which we'll see in a couple episodes here. But we're building up to a life that Vito could have had out here, but he ends up going back to the life, and not even for the good reason of like his kids or something. He goes back later on for the mafia life.
Right. He didn't want he was bored. Like this life was too boring for him. It's not that he could have had obviously, a stable place to stay and his little job. Like he would have survived. I doubt they would have come looking for him in that, little town. I think it was just, yeah, he wanted the thrill. It was like sort of like when Melfi says, why a shark keeps moving? I feel like, yeah, he needed to keep moving.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in another episode here when it comes up. But we also have AJ going after Junior here. He's trying to basically live up to who his father is. Ends up having a panic attack in the episode. One of the first ones we've seen in a long time with him. And again, the scene with Tony and AJ where he's like, "You're breaking my heart," is a movie, like one of the most emotional sequences we have between the two so far.
Definitely. I think and then it really shows like AJ when he says, Michael Corleone when he shoots those guys. It's like you can tell like he thinks that's what would show to his dad that he's like a good son. Like he thinks that's sort of what his dad expects from him.
Yeah, and then we also have Tony, very interesting moment with Tony about to sleep with Juliana, but sort of does it because he feels guilty about, Carmela took care of him when he was weak and stuff like that. So it's one of the few times we see some like genuine humanity from Tony. But at the end of the episode here, it's very funny. He like yells at Carmela, yeah, about the turkey. And it's like he's almost mad at Carmela for guilting him into not sleeping with this woman, even though she didn't do that. That was all on him. It's like how he processes emotions is very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. He was like, he wanted to he was like tempted and wanted to get laid. So now he has like all this pent up frustration. And he's like, he blames her, even though he's not really blaming her, but he's like, he has to put the frustration somewhere.
But yeah, really good episode here. Moving on to the next one, though, The Ride. One that was not super popular when it first came out, but I think since then a lot of fans have kind of really come around to this episode. To me, it's one of the best ones. Like the sequence with Christopher falling asleep at the fair as the lights are turning off is one of the most striking like images the series has ever done with its cinematography.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I was actually just watching that episode before. That whole sequence and really just his whole, his relapse that, starts from, you should have a glass of wine, celebrate your kid. And it's really it goes to, it shows Tony's enabling of Christopher and sort of that starts this sort of final downward spiral that he never really comes out of.
And Christopher obviously has a new girlfriend, Kelly, who gets pregnant, and they get married in this episode. And a lot of people are like, what the hell? This girl came out of nowhere, and now, he's married to her. And I think that's sort of the point. It's like Christopher was, after Adriana, the one woman he kind of did genuinely love, even though he's obviously horrible to her. But he did genuinely love her.
His own form of love, yeah.
Yes, and this woman he doesn't really love. But she's just there. It's like, okay, this is gonna be my wife. We're gonna have a kid. I have to have these, as a mobster here. I gotta have a family. And so I think it's intentional that there wasn't really a focus on this woman. She's just kind of there to be his wife and mother of his child.
Right. She was a sort of the placeholder. Like it was, and she was, and I thought actually, I thought she was a really nice girl, but yeah, I mean, it was more of just she was somebody that he, get with, and then they could buy, the house with the like, the nice lawn and sort of the whole the whole American dream.
Yeah, it's. I think it was very much intentional, and the whole fair that's going on here with Paulie having his problems with the owner and stuff like that, or the statue, and then eventually going back to his mother Nucci, and they just sit together and watch TV. I thought it was a very nice little moment here. Again, I hated how he treated her because she's such a nice old lady, but it was nice to see them at the end here, just kind of having a quiet moment together. It reminded me of like Tony and Junior's quiet moments.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it was nice, like them just sitting and watching, because that was like his flawed way of apologizing without like putting it in words. But it's, better than certainly what they'd been experiencing before.
Exactly. And the next episode, Mo and Joe here, we're continuing on the story of, Vito in New Hampshire with Jim. Again, they're, as we said before, he hates this kind of having to work hard and stuff like that. And so even though he has sort of happiness, he ends up leaving to go back to the mob. And it's interesting, like I talked about when we talked about Ralph's death, a lot of these characters have moments right before they're killed where they remind you that they're pieces of shit. And so you can kind of, in Vito's storyline here, you can kind of have a lot of sympathy for him because, he can't be himself because he's gay and he finally has love and you're kind of rooting for him. But on his way back to New Jersey, he kills some guy who car he crashed into. Again, kind of reminding you that, like, no, this guy's a piece of shit. Don't sympathize with him too much.
Right. Which was like sort of like the opposite with Ralph, because with Ralph, it was more like at the very end, you start to like potentially sympathize with him. Whereas with Vito, it's like you sort of sympathize with him a little bit. And then you're like, okay, he's no good. And not to mention, he's driving back, like while he's like drinking the bottle of alcohol. So he's not even, I mean, he's acting pretty recklessly in general, sort of a continuation of his prior reckless behavior. It's sad, but I guess, he couldn't stay away from the life.
Yeah, we're going to see the consequences of that soon here. But, Johnny Sack in this episode's dealing with, being in jail. That's been going on since the end of last season, having to, sell his house. And, it's just, we're seeing the kind of fall of what happens when you get arrested and stuff like that. And you have to take a plea deal. And it's sad to see Johnny. Well, obviously it's going to be even worse in the next part here. But yeah, it's sad that he's going through that. Although Tony ends up kind of preying on his friend here in order to get do something nice for Janice and Bobby to get them that house.
Yeah, I thought that was really like also just showed sort of a nasty side of Tony, because sure, he was doing something for Janice, but it was, I mean, poor Ginny, that she already had lost, her husband, so much, so many of their assets. The house was like one of the sort of stable things that she still had. Well, not so much anymore. So I think it was also Janice. I think it really showed a selfish side of her as well. Even like she was so excited about it, like Ginny's looking there, like looking like she's barely, alive, when Janice is like running around all enthusiastically looking at everything.
Yeah, and it definitely shows you that, like, earlier in the episode, Janice was there for her birthday and was like complimenting the house. And it's like, oh, well, all these people are supposed to be friends, but again, they'll prey on each other no matter what.
Yeah, she was complimenting the house because she's like, oh, this looks good for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it. But it is what it is. But the next episode here, Cold Stones, we have Carmela going to France with Rosalie. And this episode, she reminds me a lot of Tony, where he would have these sort of like profound ideas that he constantly would kind of bring up with people. We'll see the same thing with Tony this season and next season too. But her also constantly bringing up, negative news, sad stuff to Rosalie.
Oh yeah, we worry so much.
Reminds me of Tony, like constantly bringing up like we'll see in the next season that he brings up like some sad news with people. So yeah, she reminded me a lot of Tony in this episode.
And that's also a very Livia thing to do too, when you think about it, bringing up negative news. But yeah, that was a really when she talks about, we worry so much sometimes it feels like it's all we do, but in the end it just gets washed away. That also then makes me think of Puss, because I think of Puss's body sort of washing away, when they drop it into the ocean. Sort of a side note, but yeah, she gets very philosophical, and then Rosalie's like, "Let me take a picture."
Yes, exactly. I think that again. I think she was trying to get at something profound here with all the stuff she was talking about, but it didn't translate to other people. They just wanted to kind of have fun, and I think again Tony dealt with that a lot in the series. In this episode, we have Vito's death. He comes back, tries to get back into the life, but Phil obviously takes him out. What do you think about Phil? Like, do you think Phil was gay?
I mean, I think that they definitely, the fact that they had him walk out of the closet, and even the way he was sort of like holding like the mattress, or maybe I think it definitely, and then plus the fact that he had been in prison for 20 years, I think that they were, if nothing else, trying to sort of lead our heads to think about that, whether or not he was gay. I mean, I didn't see much romance or affection between him and his wife, although he did, have a Gumar. I mean, I think, maybe he's straight, but had, experiences in prison, or maybe he's bi. I mean, I think it could be a number of things, but I do think they were at the very least trying to make us think about that, because, I mean, walking out of the closet.
I think so too. I know there's some people who are like, oh, the homophobic guy is secretly gay is such like a cliche. And I admit that is true. But I think that all that stuff with him coming out of the closet, the fact that they stuck a pool cue up his ass, it's hinting at some kind of repressed feelings, which again, maybe it was just the stuff he did in prison or something like that. And he feels kind of shame for it, that he feels the need to take it out on Vito. Yeah, I think it was very intentional. David Chase even said all that stuff was intentional. So it's pretty I don't see it as controversial that they were trying to hint at something about Phil's character, the fact that he's so kind of obsessed with killing Vito like this. And obviously this is one of the things that's going to lead to kind of the war between New Jersey and New York. It's all these problems that have been building up for multiple seasons now. But the next episode here, Kaisha, we get sort of like a pause on things. It's an interesting episode. It's a Christmas episode, one of the first we've had in a while. Phil has his heart attack in this episode, and Tony has him have like kind of a moment of like, hey, I've been there too. I have this kind of spiritual knowledge. It's an interesting like calm before the storm here. There's a lot of tension in the air, especially with like Tony and Christopher, the fact that in Butchie, and the fact that Christopher is kind of sleeping with the girl that Tony was interested in. But it ends on this like quiet but tense moment of everyone gathered around the Soprano house for Christmas, seemingly peacefully, but you feel like there's tension in the air.
Oh, definitely. Even just from like Tony's comment, like, "Oh, you're gonna hog all the ice," like to Christopher, just sort of like, yeah, there's tension stirring, and especially after the whole whatever happened there sit down that ended up blowing up. There are definitely some not happy people there at the end of that episode. And then I thought it was also interesting how even still they sort of pushed back when Tony was celebrating at first that Phil had a heart attack. So Sylvia was like, the devil, in terms of like, maybe we shouldn't be celebrating Phil possibly dying.
Yeah, which we'll see in the next season here, the way it plays out. We also have AJ meeting Blanca, who is going to be a big love interest for him. It's interesting the way they handle AJ settling a dispute with these guys being loud outside the room, and he bribes them with a expensive mountain bike. And, on one level, you can look at that like, oh, it's weak. We're kind of expecting him to fight these guys and prove he's a man. But on the other hand, he sort of resolved the conflict peacefully, and he does get rewarded. Like Blanca obviously likes him enough to have sex with him after that. So it's an interesting contrast to the way that we would obviously know that like someone like Tony would handle it.
Yeah, and I think it also spoke to, perhaps the fact that those kids that were sort of messing around, like maybe they're just bored and they just like needed, like if they had, a bicycle of their own, or obviously they probably couldn't afford it, but maybe they just needed something to keep them busy.
The scene doesn't resolve in such a way that it makes AJ look like weak or pathetic. it's just he's just kind of a different person than his father is, the way he resolves conflict, and the series doesn't necessarily condemn him for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think personally, I think he handled it the good way there. I mean, why make it more of a conflict where he ends up they get in a fight? Who knows when someone could have a knife or something or even a gun. I mean, that wouldn't do anything good by attracting the police.
And obviously in this episode too, we also have Carmela dealing with the whole thing with Adriana. She's been worried about Adriana. She has a dream in Paris where she realizes that Adriana was killed when she talks about hiring a private investigator. And that's when Tony finally gets off his ass and gets her building approved. But it's telling that Carmela has this kind of epiphany about Adriana, but then immediately drops it once she has what she wants, which is her spec house. So again, it's that kind of selfishness we see from all these characters.
Right. Like when she says, "This is the best Christmas present I could ever get," it's like she was just like, that was almost like, yeah, her new romantic project almost of sorts. Like that was her new thing to get wrapped up in.
But definitely like this first season 6A here, again, the next part of the season 6 will premiere the following year after this one. It's really two distinct seasons, but we have a lot of, again, like I said, one of the themes in this first season 6A was the calm before the storm. There's some stuff bubbling under the surface, but it's not come to a head yet. Everyone is sort of at peace by the end here, even though we feel the tension. But especially starting next season, we're going to have a string of very, very dark episodes to end the series with, which I'm really looking forward to dissecting with you, because I think season 6B, I prefer 6B over 6A. Like 6A's got a lot of good episodes, don't get me wrong, but 6B is where we see everything really kind of step up.
Yeah, we're kind of like in the final lap, the final couple laps. And when I think about the calm before the storm, I also think of 6B when we see Bobby standing by the lake, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, next time with Nika. And I think to me that also epitomizes like calm before the storm, where he knows darker shit is on the horizon.
It's all going to come to a head next time. So we thank you all for listening to this episode, and stay tuned for the final episode of us discussing The Sopranos. Stay tuned for that next, and we will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks so much.